Good morning, everyone. I think we'll kick off. Good to have you with us this morning. Clearly, we're all the ones that have come through the storm with power and Wi-Fi. So it's been a pretty hairy 24 hours or so. So hopefully that's behind us now, and you haven't been impacted too severely or in any way with property damage or anything like that. So it's certainly been a challenging while. I'm sure Niall will touch on that in a little while. So look, we're delighted to have Niall MacCarthy, the Managing Director of Cork Airport, with us this morning for our final Business Breakfast Live of 2021. And as always, delighted that the event is in association with Ronan Daly Jermyn and also our media partners in the Irish Examiner. So good morning to Richard and team at RDJ and Tom Magella and colleagues as well at the Irish Examiner. Good to have you with us. Just a little bit of the usual housekeeping, just try and keep the mics off. You would have seen coming in there that we're recording the event this morning. We hope to have a good Q&A and chat session with Niall there towards the end, or even as we go through a little bit later on. So use the chat box. If something pops into your mind as we move through, just feel free to put it in there, and hopefully we can get to that. And as always, you have a choice there with Zoom in terms of speaker view or gallery view for the event. And of course, let's keep it moving on social media as well. So hashtag CC Breakfast if you're on Twitter there, and hopefully we can generate a bit of online activity as well. So I mentioned the Irish Examiner, and great to see there last week that they won 6 Newsbrands Journalism Awards, including Best Digital News Coverage. So just to mark that fantastic achievement, Examiner did prepared a short little video for us this morning, so we'll run that. Well done to the individual winners and categories there, and obviously the wider Examiner team. That's fantastic recognition of really outstanding work over the last year or so. So as usual, this morning we have our member soapboxes. So first up this morning, we have Micheál Sheridan, who's CEO of the Irish Community Air Ambulance. Good morning, Micheál.
Good morning, Conor. Thank you.
So, over to you.
Thanks a million. So I just want people to imagine for a moment being on a family day out in Dingle, Waterville or Schull when you suffer a cardiac arrest or you're involved in an RTC. You need to reach a team of specialists in CUH as quickly as possible, but you could be up to 2 hours away by road from them. The Irish Community Air Ambulance could cut that journey time down to 30 minutes, and that can often be the difference between life and death for people. We're Ireland's first and only charity-funded air ambulance. This year we'll have been tasked over 500 times. We currently receive no government funding, and it costs €1.5 million to run the service. So we're calling on business leaders in Cork and the broader Munster region to consider funding us this year as one of their Christmas donations. And just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity.
Great, Micheál, and fantastic work that you and colleagues do. And I think a call out there that's been, I'm sure, well heard by those on the call this morning. And next up, we have Liam O'Riordan, who's the head of the Cork office of InvestWise Financial Planning. Good morning, Liam.
Morning, how are you?
Very well now.
So we're kind of one of the newest financial firms here in Cork, and we set up in Horgan's Quay. So we're a kind of a unique proposition in the sense that we're the only fee-based financial planning and financial brokerage in Cork and in Munster, in fact. So as professional planners, what we do is that clients will, a bit like Google Maps, they'll tell us what their financial destination is or what their financial dream is. And our role then is to plan that journey for them and to make those financial dreams a reality. And the fact in that we don't charge any commissions or fees on any of the products that we set up for clients, that in itself will create huge savings for clients. We also run a kind of a second opinion service for clients too, that if they have existing stuff that they want us to look after, we're more than happy to do that also. So if any clients want to reach out, or if they feel we can be a service, they can get us on the website, obviously, or reach out to me individually, and I'll be glad to take any calls.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Liam. Well said. So next, can I move on and introduce to you Paula Cogan, the President of Cork Chamber. Good morning, Paula.
Morning, Conor. I'm here over the border in Kerry this morning. Morning to you all. I do hope that you all and your colleagues and businesses are all safe following the last 24 hours and that we can return to some form of our new normal in the next 24 hours. Again, a huge thank you to our public and emergency services who've worked tirelessly to keep us safe from Storm Barra, who of course we in Cork have adopted as our own. To our hospitality and the wider events community members, we send you our support. And our ask of all Cork Chamber members is that we continue to support one another and shop local this Christmas season. Don't forget our Cork Chamber gift vouchers as an ideal gift for customers and colleagues alike. Today, we listen to a story of resilience from Cork Chamber and from Cork Airport. The story of resilience that Niall is going to tell us around the airport is certainly one of the highlights of 2021 for me as Cork Chamber President. I was able to attend the official opening of the One-Way a few weeks ago. I was one of the hundreds of Cork business people who prior to the pandemic depended on the accessibility of the airport to the wider world for my livelihood. We know that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted on air travel. And while we are certainly not out of the woods yet, the way the team at Cork Airport went about the execution of the project in a timely fashion, communicated effectively to all stakeholders, and delivered a project which secures the future of vital connectivity for Cork on budget is a clear example of what can be delivered in Cork. Can I take this opportunity to wish you all an enjoyable and safe Christmas? We are certainly all need to recharge the batteries and to prepare for a new year with all that it may bring. The mantra, control the controllables, has never been so apt. To Conor and the Cork Chamber team, and to the hard-working and ambitious board that I work with daily, thank you so much. And to you, our members, thank you for making 2021 a year we'll all remember. Thanks, Conor.
Great, thanks very much, Paula. Appreciate that, and I think everyone on the call here would recognise the huge amount of work and contribution you've made to the Chamber and the business community over the last 12 months as well, along with other board colleagues. So well done on all of that. So Niall MacCarthy, good morning.
As I unmute myself, Conor, good morning. How are you? It's good to see you.
Very well, very well. Good to have you with us this morning. Niall, I've a bit of a bio here. I'll just run through it for those on the call who may not know you as well as some of us do. So Niall is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and he trained and qualified in practice and worked in Dunn Stores, head office and senior finance and IT roles from 93 to 2000 before he joined the DAA. He has 20 years experience working in airports, and he worked in a number of roles before becoming Managing Director of Cork Airport. He sits as well on the Visit Cork Provincial Bureau Board, and he's Vice Chair of the Board of the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation, ITIC. He's married with 5 children, lives in Belgooly. He loves to travel, and sea angling keeps him occupied when he has a little bit of spare time. And I've had the pleasure of working very closely with Niall and his colleagues at the airport over the last number of years, and in a very cooperative environment, and certainly a very enthusiastic and energetic Managing Director of Cork Airport. So you're very welcome and glad to have you with us this morning, Niall.
Thank you, Conor. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to see everyone virtually. We thought we were going to be all up at a breakfast in the Cork International Hotel, but unfortunately, pandemic has meant we're doing it virtually.
Well, pandemic and weather, it's ironic actually. We had planned on this event being a physical event, actually a hybrid event at the Cork International Hotel this morning. Ironically, we possibly would have been cancelling anyway had that been the case and been back in virtual. So there you go. So the life of Managing Director of an airport, Niall, from pandemic, and then you get Storm Barra thrown at you. What's the last 24 hours or so been like for you and your colleagues?
They've been a bit like the weather. They've been turbulent. We got the first couple out, believe it or not, yesterday. So there was a lot of brave souls got onto an Amsterdam flight yesterday morning and a Birmingham flight, and they flew away. And I'm a hardy traveller, and I'm not sure I would have liked to have been climbing into a plane yesterday morning with the turbulence. Aer Lingus cancelled all their activity, so that sort of made it clear. Ryanair tried to operate, and their Stansted got diverted to Shannon, their Birmingham got diverted to Shannon, their Gatwick got diverted to Dublin, and then souls who wanted to go out on the Lanzarote, Gdansk, Amsterdam, Gatwick, etc., overnighted in Cork hotels. So it was an interesting 24 hours on top of the pandemic. But we're back flying again this morning, normal operations. There was actually a snow warning early morning, so the guys were ready to sweep for snow. And I suppose one of the things in aviation is we breed hardy types. So you're used to crisis ranging from weather at every other crisis imaginable, and we bounce back. That's what the training is.
Good stuff. And that new runway is getting a good testing out, be it from storm, rain, potentially snow. So I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit later on. We're changing the format slightly this morning, everyone. I suppose Niall has, he has a lot of information, a lot of messaging he wants to get across to the Cork business community. So Niall's going to kick off by running through a slide deck for us this morning for 15 or 20 minutes. And then we'll come back and we'll get into our usual conversation and engagement with Niall at that point. So Niall, I hand over to you to share your screen there and to move through your presentation.
Very good. So here's the moment that we hope the technology works. So Connie, you can see that, can you?
You can see that, and we're in full screen mode there now. So over to you.
Very good. So first of all, I'm joined by a number of colleagues from Cork Airport, whom you may or may not know. Brian Gallagher is our head of business and aviation and commercial business development. And Brian is the man who lands all the new routes. So you should get to know him and meet up with him. He's a great guy. Kevin Cullinan is known to many, our head of communications, group head of communications for DAA, and Kathleen Walsh from our comms team. And a big shout out to our Cork Airport Development Council members on the call this morning. I see a couple there. I see Tim Lucy, obviously the county CEO, and Doherty City CEO, Connor himself, Anne-Marie O'Sullivan, Aaron Mansworth. And if I've missed any more, I apologise. But Cork Airport Development Council is a hugely important body to us, meets quarterly, actually meets more often than quarterly during the pandemic, and provides governance, engagement, stakeholder input to us. We probably met around 6 times this year, and a hugely important body, and we're very grateful to the input. So I'm going to take about 20 minutes of your time, if that's okay, and just take you through some themes. So this here, a little bit about DAA. DAA, not a terribly well-known company. People think they know it, but they don't really know it. So you have Dublin Airport, which is the biggest airport, obviously, in the country. Cork Airport, the second biggest airport. We've our international duty-free operation, which operates in many countries abroad. First duty-free shop in Ireland, in the world was in Ireland. And we have a new business 5 or 6 years old, which is running airports in other countries, called DAA International. And so I've a sort of a technical graphic here to show you the impact. So when you have a geographically and broadly diversified business, you normally think you're immune to shock. But we were essentially wiped out in Dublin, wiped out in Cork, wiped out in international duty-free. Now, our consulting contracts to run terminals abroad didn't terminate, but downsized. So it was a more or less across-the-board wipeout. And if you look at it then in geographical terms, again, people don't realise that our Irish airport company, which is the shining star in the Irish semi-state sector, in that it's a semi-state, but its bonds are traded on the stock exchange, operating in all these countries abroad. Again, as sort of a very technical graphic to show you the geographic, it was just carnage. It was carnage. So if you look at that map from New Zealand to Barbados, there was lockdowns and closures and whatever. So it was a huge impact. In terms of mapping out one of our industry bodies, the airline industry body, IATA, mapped out in terms of seat kilometers flown, the impact of this pandemic. And if you think things like the 1991 global recession, that's the blue line, or SARS, the previous pandemic, yellow line, or 9/11, a red line, it's just look at the scale of this in terms of wipeout. They were big. There were big impacts in aviation. This one is off the league in terms of how long and how deep it has been in terms of impact. I don't know how many of you flew from Cork Airport during the pandemic, but these are Cork Airport photos. We were actually open throughout the pandemic. We were open every single day around the clock, and we were asked to stay open for vital connectivity by the Irish government, and we did so. However, there was a do not travel message. And so it was a sort of a bit of a paradox. So these, again, are photos in Cork. You had the Gardaí who were manning the entrance to the airport to check that your journey was essential. So essential workers could go in and out, cargo could go in and out. Mihall's Air Ambulance could go in and out, and the and other vital airlines could go in and out. So you had the Gardaí manning the entrance, you had the Gardaí sometimes in the departures queue for security. That's from our own CCTV, and then you had the army on arrival. So it probably was an unwelcoming place. So when I say we were down 94% during the pandemic, you had people saying the government isn't policing air travel. Absolutely, it was policing air travel. It was policing it in and was policing it out. And the outcome of that is in the numbers. So we were down 94% during the pandemic. We were open, and these are real photos taken at Cork during the pandemic. And what you see is a complete change to our business. So the Air Corps there taking on casualties from an ambulance. You had an air ambulance there, that 9H all. You had the Air Corps again in helicopters doing search and rescue, and you had you see a person, poor person there being brought in an incubator to Germany through the airport, and lots of search and rescue, cargo as well. So we had plenty of aircraft coming in, but not many passengers. Almost overnight, like, you know, the traditional thing from Cork, people say you can fly to nowhere from Cork Airport. We lost 56 routes, and there's the 56 there. Now we've taken out the breakdown of the traffic by route because that's commercially sensitive, but there were 56 routes out of Cork Airport in 2019. And that's scheduled only. And you see the charter routes on the right, the Blackpool, the Edinburgh, the London Luton, the Lourdes, we don't count those in the routes. So they were on top. So there was and is a lot of connectivity out of Cork Airport. And they went overnight. So we kept 2 routes. We kept Amsterdam and London Heathrow, and they operated right through the pandemic. And I've got to say, I'm very grateful to Aer Lingus and to KLM for keeping Cork connected. There were doctors, there were nurses, there were people suffering bereavements and so on who needed to get home and fulfill the criteria of essential workers, and also the cargo in the hold as well. And we had cargo aircraft coming in. So this is our supply base, or our business partnerships. And if you recall, we did a study in 2019, Intervistas, where they worked out the economic impact of Cork Airport. The economic impact, and this is a genuine number, this is not sort of a dreamed up number or one that's massaged to look good, but the economic impact of Cork Airport to the south of Ireland region is 904 million euro. So the guts of €1 billion. And it supports 12,000 jobs. And the irony is most of those jobs are in tourism. They're not in the airport. So we haven't put the tourism jobs in this, but these are the companies that work in partnership with Cork Airport at the airport. So just to give you a flavour, you obviously have the airlines, some which are based here, some which aren't. You have the customs, the Gardaí in immigration, you've Met Air and based here, agriculture based here, CSO who have staff based here. And then your ones that you don't really see full front of house, but have a huge job here. Swissport, who do the check-in operation and all of the bag handling. Western Aviation, who do the business jets. Denata, who make the sandwiches for the planes. Again, you wouldn't even think of that. Shell Topaz refuel the planes, and so on. And you keep on looking through it. And what actually happened then is, as we lost 94% of our passengers, almost overnight, you saw our supply chain collapsing. So what happened was, first of all, and I don't blame anyone who undertook the actions they undertook, because they had to do it for the survival of their companies. So our commercial business partners invoked force majeure. So that'd be like the restaurants, the food and beverage, the bars, the shop, the bureau de change, and they just said, we can't survive on a 6% throughput. So here's the force majeure clause. We're out of here. Unfortunately, we have to lay off all of our staff. So that was the first thing. So all of our commercial contracts collapsed. The CSO and Red Sea, who survey passengers, there was no need for them. They couldn't survey during the pandemic. So they obviously had to exit the airport. Disability services, when you're down to 6% essential workers, there was no need for disability services. Bag handling, fueling of aircraft reduced its operation. So you saw almost a full collapse of the supply chain. And even companies that you wouldn't associate, like obviously the company that makes the sandwiches for the planes had no business and laid off their staff. So it brought our economic impact to light. And that's not talking about hotels and restaurants and activities and attractions and so on. So the supply chain just simply collapsed during the pandemic. In terms of just broadening that out to the aviation industry, As Conor said, I'm on the board of ITIC, and ITIC modelled out recovery in Irish tourism. So you had 9.6 million. What's this measuring? This is measuring international visitors to the Republic of Ireland. So you had 9.7 million international visitors to the Republic of Ireland in 2019. Let's say 10 million, round it up. And ITIC has modelled out, using a university professor, has modelled out 3 scenarios: a pessimistic recovery scenario in red, a median, which is like a center line in blue, and an optimistic in green. And it predicts, let's take the center line, it predicts recovery by 2026. Now, we in the airports industry think this is a little bit pessimistic. So the good news is we think, and so this obviously has airlines, it has attractions, it has, you know, ferries, it has car hire operators, all the members of ITIC feeding into it. And we think Irish tourism can recover earlier than what this says. With a fair wind, we think it can be 2024, probably 2025. So we're 1 to 2 years, I'm talking airports here, and more optimistic than ITIC, but that's assuming the pandemic gets under control and that we don't lose next summer. Just moving on, this is real data, and it's 1 month's data for seat capacity in the Irish market in July 22. So it's your peak month next year versus 2019, okay? And so don't mind the heading there, I see a typo on the heading there. So it's 22 versus 19. So you segment your market into 4 markets essentially. So you've continental European flights, you've UK flights, you've US and Canada, which is called North America, and you've rest of the world. So in July, no, it won't be like this every month, the number of seats flown into Ireland from Europe will be 12% down. From Britain will be 15% down, from the US will be only 11% down, and the rest of the world will be 36% down, because as you know, Australia is still closed, New Zealand's still closed, and Asia is still closed. So rest of the world is going to take a hit. So there's a decent bounce back there, but it is important to note there won't be the same number of flights or seats into and out of Ireland next year, and probably the year after. It's going to take a while to recover. That the carnage there has been in job terms and in aircraft terms and handback at planes, and also airlines gone bust. So just to be clear, you would have flown to Cardiff with Flybe out of Cork. Flybe no longer exists, it's gone into liquidation. You would have flown to maybe 11 destinations in the UK with Stobart Air, and you didn't book it as Stobart Air, you booked it on the Aer Lingus site. But if you flew to Southampton or Birmingham or Manchester or Edinburgh or Glasgow or Newquay or Rennes, any of these destinations out of Cork, you were flying with a company that was acting under franchise from Aer Lingus called Stobart Air. That's gone bust. So the carnage has left lasting damage. The Bureau de Change in Cork Airport has gone bust. The bank is closed and won't be returning. So there is long-term damage that we have to rebuild and recover from. But I don't want you to feel that this is a pessimistic presentation, not by any means. We will bounce back, but we'll bounce back differently with new airlines and new business partners and so on, and with business partners that we had before. So quickly moving through, we were doing well, I think. This is Cork v Shannon performance in the last 5 years, and it's measuring millions of passengers, inbound and outbound. So it's the total passengers, and it includes transit, so military and, you know, business jets and so on. So Shannon was 1.71 million passengers in 2015 and was 1.71 exactly static in 2019. So 5 years of static. We grew 25% in that same period. And if you look at the gap of Cork getting bigger than Shannon each year, that's interesting, because we were the guts of 300,000 passengers bigger in 15, and then we grew to 800,000, 8 and 7 is 15, nearly 900,000 bigger in 19. So Cork was getting relatively bigger than Shannon and increasing the edge. So, you know, for people who say independence is the answer to Cork, independence was given to Shannon, and there you go, the results are on the cards. We're very proudly part of DAA, but we have an independent management team, and that all decisions for Cork made in Cork, and a very supportive board in DAA. Okay. Moving on quickly, diversification is key. You can't depend on too little now. In a pandemic situation, diversification doesn't save you. But a number of years ago, we were very, very, very dependent on just Aer Lingus and Ryanair. And with the help and professionalism of guys like Brian Gallagher, we've diversified. So you've Iberia Express, Swiss, Volaterra, Air France, KLM, Lufthansa, and Vueling. A lot of small European airports would give their arm to have the quality of that airport partnership or airline partnership. So KLM is a huge airline, as you know, Air France, Lufthansa, Swiss. They're very, very, very prestigious airlines. So we're very lucky to have them in Cork. In terms of what we think next year, we're going into next year with our eyes open, but quite optimistic. We think next year is a 1.8 million passenger year out of Cork, contrasting with 2.6 million in 2019. So what that means is we will recover, if the pandemic stays under control, 70%. That will probably need the lifting of the new antigen testing regime that's been introduced to make it happen, because that's a bit of a barrier to travel, where people have to get testing as well. And we come back to that in the Q&A. The deal up to now was you get vaccinated and you've more or less unrestricted travel within Europe. The deal now is you need an antigen test on the way back, and certain countries require you to get a test going in. So you probably won't see a 70% bounce back if that continues beyond March. So hopefully the pandemic will get under control. Those new restrictions will be lifted and we'll have a good summer next year. So here's the data. So Aer Lingus have positioned 2 A320 aircraft back to Cork. Ryanair and KLM have restarted services. KLM is operating twice a day to Amsterdam. And so people tend to default to Heathrow as their connector to long haul. I would remind you, Amsterdam is a great connecting airport. So to give it a look in, we're not undermining Heathrow and any, but give Amsterdam a look in terms of connections. You might be surprised at price, and you might be surprised at how handy it is to connect through as an airport. Vueling, I flew on them last weekend into Paris, a beautiful service, and people don't even realize it's there. So I'd remind you of Vueling to Paris Orly. It's actually nearer to the center of Paris than de Gaulle. And I got it was myself and my wife, it was our first leisure trip since the pandemic. Flew in there for the weekend. Lovely flight, not that expensive, and €30 taxi fare for the two of us into the center of Paris from Orly. So for your weekend away at Christmas, we got an antigen test in the center of Paris. Every second chemist is doing them, €25. And we flew back into Cork. And by the way, I know Irish Examiners sponsor this, but sometimes don't believe everything you read in the press. My antigen test was checked 3 times on the way back. It was checked at the entrance to the security queue in Orly. It was checked at the gate, and it was checked by the Gardaí on arrival here in Cork. So it's not a barrier to travel, but it was checked. And so by the 6th of December, we're going to have 80% of our capacity for the corresponding week in 2019 in place at Cork. Now, I've got to say, load factors are lower at the moment. So there's less people traveling. So there's a lot of empty seats on planes because of the people nervousness and also the new testing requirement as well. So an 80% capacity doesn't equal an 80% volume of visitors or an 80% volume of outbound passengers, because we have to fill those seats. So here's the scores on the doors. So TUI are a scheduled airline out of Cork now. You could always book it through a travel agent, but you can actually go onto the TUI site and book flights out of Cork. Air France, obviously, into de Gaulle will be starting this summer. KLM are there twice a day, and KLM have the potential to go to 3 times a day out of Cork if we can build a bit of demand there, but they're very pleased with their Cork operation. They're there at the moment. Aer Lingus are back with 6 routes for the winter, 7 routes for the summer. Ryanair, 13 routes for the winter, 23 routes for the summer. Lufthansa into Frankfurt starting in March. I think Brian is on the call and he'll tell me what that is. Let me just check while I'm on. I had a sheet here. Starting 27th of March. Swiss have a ski route into Geneva for the winter, and they will restart their business route Zurich for the summer. And Vueling, as we said, Paris Orly year round. And just consider that as an option out of Cork as well. It's a new route. We're still in discussions with Volaterra. They used to operate a Verona route. Emerald Airlines now is a very important one. As I said already, the Aer Lingus regional franchise that used to be operated by Stobart Air is up for grabs, and Emerald Airlines, a new Irish startup, have been awarded the contract. Officially, it's from the 1st of January 2023. Emerald are hoping to start earlier, and we do expect them to start in Cork at some stage, probably late 2022, and they will fill in the UK provincial gaps. And I must call out Ryanair as well. Ryanair are now serving Birmingham, Manchester, and Edinburgh out of Cork, which are previous UK provincial routes that were served by Stobart there. So you can get to some UK provincial destinations now with Ryanair out of Cork, and we're grateful to them for that. And Iberia Express are waiting to see, will the summer schools for English language open up again as normal, or will there be restrictions and so on? We expect them to operate a Madrid service, but they're waiting to just see how the pandemic eases up in Cork. But I suppose there you go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 airlines, and quite a number of routes bouncing back for next year. And again, in hubbing out of Cork for long haul. So you've Amsterdam now with both Aer Lingus and KLM. So you have Aer Lingus a number of times a week, and KLM are now twice a day out of Cork. You have Frankfurt, potential hub. You have Zurich, a potential hub. Paris, Charles de Gaulle from the summer with Aer Lingus onto the Air France network. But the two main hubs are, as we say, Heathrow, which is our traditional hub out of Cork. And don't forget Amsterdam as a hub, a really good hub, worth trying. And I promised Conor I'd be 20 minutes, so I'm not watching the time, but I hope I'm within my time. We had a good presentation from Ernst & Young, actually, a number of weeks ago with DA Exec. And they were talking about strategy and changing priorities. And the presenter, who was a very good guy, said there's a lot of P's to think about if you're doing your strategy. And so we're doing a new strategy in Cork Airport, which will take us up to 2025. And so if you look at it, if you just step back from your normal things that you strategize about, in terms of what's important to the Irish electorate, housing is the number one thing that's important to the Irish electorate: the shortage of housing, the cost of housing, scarcity, high rents, health, sláinte care and rolling it out, and the cost of our healthcare system, bringing that under control, and what you get for the bang for the buck in that, and climate is the number 3 items. They're the 3 things that the public are thinking about. But in business terms, there's a load of P's, so it's a different type of strategy. So your pandemic, which you wouldn't normally be strategizing, when is that going to get it under control? Are we going to be still talking about boosters in 3 years' time? People, worth continuing the discussion in terms of people. So hard to get staff now, let's be honest, very hard to get staff. And we're seeing pay inflation. There's going to be big pay inflation in the Irish economy, and pay claims, people's expectations, retention of talents, a whole big new and deepened conversation about people. There's a lot of pent-up demand for travel. There's a lot of pent-up savings, which hasn't crystallized yet, but with a benign improvement in terms of the COVID scene, and improvement in terms of the travel restrictions, you could see a really bumper summer next year, both with the amount of savings that are in the Irish economy and pent-up demand for people to get away from the sun. Pay, we talked about pay. Pay inflation is going to be a thing, and inflation is going to appear back in the Irish economy. We haven't thought about inflation for a long, long, long time. We've been used to interest rates, on mortgages 2.5%, 3.5%. If you're going to see pay demands of 4% and 5%, you're seeing it already in terms of the price of goods. Brexit has hit the price of goods, inflation, and shortages, labor shortages, and material shortages have driven up the price of goods. So you're going to see inflation in the Irish economy, which is going to be interesting. We haven't dealt with that in a while. Process, people in airline terms and airport terms are demanding contactless. They don't want to be touching equipment. They don't want to be touching machines. And so that's sort of forcing us to think through the process. Like, in theory, in a few years' time, your face can be your boarding card. Your face can be your boarding card. Your face can get you on the plane. And your face can get you through security. Now, there's a whole load of stuff to be done in terms of data protection and link up with passports, but there's a move to paperless and contactless everywhere, but also particularly in airports. Power and energy prices are significantly up, and there's a move to green energy, probably not going down anytime soon. Prices, we talked about that already. Realistically, fares are going to go up medium term. I think the days of the cheap fares are numbered. Now, you will always have headline prices of get to London for €15, but it's when you look at the average fare, I think there's going to be pressure on fares. Airlines have taken a hit. They've large accumulated losses. So you're probably, and also with the green agenda, you're probably seeing fares going up. And Planet, we talked about that, sustainability wills for good. So there's a whole load of P's if you're doing your strategy to think about of new things that we mightn't have talked about 3 or 4 years ago. So I give credit to a lot of that inspiration for Ernst & Young talk we got a couple of weeks ago, but it's interesting from our own strategy they're coming out as well. Conor, with that, I'm handing back to you, but I suppose the theme is we're cautiously optimistic. Cautiously optimistic is how I'd like to leave people.
Yeah, Neil, thank you very much. That was, you've taken us through, I suppose, a real story with regard to the last 20 months or so, and I think finished up there with a lot of optimism as well in terms of the route development and the activity going forward in the airport, while I suppose not being blinded by the challenges that are out there. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the runway work. You didn't mention that in the presentation there. I know it's something that you're very proud of in terms of the delivery of that particular project, but I think it's fair to say it did cause a little bit of angst over the last period of time. I have to say that my phone was certainly ringing quite a bit in terms of people not fully understanding why, when we were starting to come out of a pandemic, the airport was closing. So you might clarify the rationale for all of that for people on the call here this morning.
So in Cork Airport, we have 2 runways. We have one which is jet capable and one which is for smaller aircraft. So the message there is you have one jet capable runway. They have a life of 20 years. Our runway, a part of it was 20 years old and a part of it was 31 years old. So it was life expired. So these have to be done. And when you do it, you have to dig it all out and you have to rebuild it and you have to do all the electrics along with it. We have a very good video, Conor, which I know you're going to share to the people on this call, a link to, and it's worth looking at. So the question was, do we do that when the market is buoyant and taking off and maybe do it over 12 months of night times, which means no flights after 10 at night and all this laying of concrete and laying of asphalt and electrical work then right through the night? It would cost 30% more. You'd have no late Heathrows, no late Alicantes, no late Birminghams. So you'd have a year of disruption in a really good year. Or do you just bite the bullet and do it over 10 weeks when the market is suppressed? And a lot of the people who were saying, well, why didn't you do it earlier in the pandemic? And people forget construction sites were closed. Construction sites were closed during the pandemic. You could get a derogation for an essential construction site. And we did a 12 million project during the depths of the pandemic, a whole baggage screening project. And every engineer we wanted to fly in had to go down to the travel lodge and quarantine, so which brought huge expense. So you couldn't do a major construction during the depths of the pandemic. So we brought this project in 12 months from funding announced through an official journal of the EU tender that normally takes 9 months, through all the design, the regulatory approvals, and the construction. And the construction period itself was 10 weeks. And you have to see the video. So Conor's going to send a link to everyone. Have a look at the video because the picture tells 1,000 words of the scale of this. We had a great contractor, with a great internal team. The Taoiseach came and opened it and he said, this is an example for how Ireland can deliver major infrastructure on time and on budget. So the guys were working 7 days a week. Anyone who drove past the airport like at 10 o'clock at night could see all the arc lights. It wasn't a 9 to 5 project. They were working 12-hour shifts. So this is a project we're really proud of. We've got it done, 20 years, and it's a really nice runway. Anyone who's flown in or seen the videos, who's flown in or seen the videos of the new lighting, by the way, which is LED, energy efficient lighting. We now have 20 years of infrastructure in the Cork airside in front of us. So very proud of that.
No, I think there's an appreciation that was the correct decision, Neil, at this point in time, in terms of, if we look at how aviation and the levels of travel have remained quite suppressed over the last period of time. I think it's all about being ready for a Christmas season this year and being ready for a really strong 2022. So well done to you and the team for delivering that project, and I think it positions us very well into the future. I suppose we do our quarterly economic trends survey, and there was an interesting stat came from the last one, which was a little bit concerning, where 64% of our members said that when they return to air travel next year in 2022, they expect that they will only be doing travel at 40% of 2019 levels. That has to be a concern for an airport. for airlines?
Yeah, it is a concern. If we just step back from that, you're surveying business members for business travel. And business travel is less than a fifth of the travel by volume on an airplane. So it's a lot on Heathrow, it's a lot on Amsterdam, but it's not much on Malaga, it's not much on a Birmingham, it's not much on a Glasgow. So the bulk of the volume in an airport is leisure. Leisure is the number one reason people give for travel. And then what's called visiting friends and relatives, which is VFR. So business is small by volume, big by value. So when people are traveling for business, they tend to book all the add-ons. They'll book the fast track, they'll book the extra bag, they'll book the meal on board. They'll book near to their departure time, so they'll pay a lot for their ticket. So they're worth a huge amount to the airline, but they're probably less than 1 in 5. So definitely Zoom and Teams have had an impact on people meeting, but we're all going to go back to meeting in person, but probably in lesser volumes. So we still say if travel restrictions are eased and we get rid of this extra antigen test in time, well in time for March, which is the summer season, that we can have a 70% year next year, 70% of 2019.
Okay, and in terms of that, of the current restrictions, Neil, did that come as a surprise to you? Is it something that you've seen having an impact at the moment? Are the airlines reporting that it's suppressing bookings at this point in time?
Yeah, it is definitely. Uncertainty is bad for any market. Uncertainty is bad for share price. So people are uncertain in terms of travel now. The previous deal, which was kind of clear, was you got vaccinated, you got your cert, or you'd recovered from COVID and you got your cert, and then you traveled without any restriction within Europe. So it was kind of easy to get your head around. Now, you coming back into Ireland, you need an antigen test taken within 48 hours or PCR taken within 72. And some of the countries also impose a test requirement for when you land. And so it means that people are sort of a little bit uncertain, they're a little bit unsure. And so what we're seeing is an increased level of no-shows. So no-shows, so let's say a Ryanair flight of 189 seats would normally have about 90% booking, and you'd have maybe 3 or 4% no-shows. You'd always get no-shows. People who miss their flight, people who decided not to travel, people who are sick. But at the moment, there's a 25 to 30% no-show factor knocking around in the airport.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is that's people who have decided they're not going to travel, there may be close contacts, they're worried about where they're going to. Now, long run, that will lead to a lot of empty seats and a lot of losses. So the antigen regime is necessary from a public health point of view, but is a barrier to travel. Yeah,
and Neil, in your second last slide, I think it was there, you showed the airlines and the routes that are moving in for winter and into summer of 2022. And I have to say, I think you've done a great job, and credit to Brian as well in terms of, I suppose, securing and bringing back those airlines that we had operating well back in 2019 into 2020, and also bringing on some of those newer routes. For example, Lufthansa into Frankfurt, excuse me, has been one that we've been talking about for probably about 5 years or so, and it's fantastic to have that in there. But equally, we have some airlines, Aer Lingus in particular, which maybe isn't coming back as strongly. So if you take, I suppose, the traditionally strong Aer Lingus connectivity into Heathrow, so Aer Lingus is operating at 3 times daily to Heathrow rather than 5. Is that a concern for you, or do you think it will be demand led, that if there are bookings, if there are travel, if there is demand into Heathrow, that has the capacity to scale back up again?
Yeah, like in terms of London market, so like we're servicing Gatwick, Stansted, Luton, we're servicing Heathrow twice a day at the moment. That could potentially rise to 4 in the summer. But it's all demand led. Like I would see the load factors every morning, and we see a lot of planes taking off with 30, 40, 50 people on them. These are 189 seaters. So it's going to be demand led. We can't expect airlines to fly empty planes. So we need the COVID pandemic. This latest variant, Omicron, is more transmissible, but it would appear it's not as causing as deep a sickness as the other one. So hopefully with more data on that in a few weeks, if the ICU numbers come down, you'll get back to the traveling with COVID certificate, maybe with booster, and then sort of opening up travel again. we can take a hit now. Christmas, Christmas is a big season, but Christmas is about a week and a half. January is a low month, February is a low month, but we have to be sorted for March, or it'll impact another summer. So this summer season, anyone in hospitality takes off on Paddy's Day, keeps going till October, and we can't dent that. If we dent that, that's another year lost for tourism.
Yeah, and look, connectivity out of Cork is hugely important. There's a question or a point in there from Fiona Clark in terms of connectivity out of Cork Airport. And I think you've dealt with some of those points in terms of the presentation, but in terms of new routes and potential new routes, particularly European routes, Neil, that's a major focus. The UK connectivity with the old Stobart routes, that's absolutely important as well. Do you want to maybe comment on how you see route development happening across Europe over the next 12-24 months?
So the first thing is demand-led. Nobody puts on a route for public service unless they get a subsidy. Nobody puts on a route for political sentiment or belief. It's all demand-led. So supply will follow demand. We've seen that with Ryanair. We've nailed previous destinations that people were looking for. People were looking for Frankfurt. Conor, you and I would have talked about that a lot. People were looking for Zurich. People were looking for ski destinations out of Cork. So we have 3 ski destinations. We've Salzburg, we've Geneva, and we've Munich. And now some of those are in lockdown. So it's all down to bums on seats. So whatever routes we need out of Cork, we get with sufficient demand. So we line up an airline, and Brian lines up an airline. He gives them evidence of demand. So evidence demand is Red Sea passenger surveys, what we call leakage through Dublin Airport. So we know where people are from that travel through Dublin Airport, and we present that to an airline and say, you can satisfy that demand out of Cork. And we get statistics from Tourism Ireland in terms of where people want to travel to in Ireland. So we give the airlines a big demand sheet. They put it into a spreadsheet. They'll put in an average fare and they'll figure out whether they're going to make a profit or loss. Everything's demand-led. So whatever routes there's enough demand for, we will service. Particularly, you have a very, very, very agile airline like Ryanair that can jump on and jump off routes very quickly.
Yeah, and obviously airlines, Neil, are hugely, commercially focused organizations, and there is only so long that they will, continue to operate routes with load factors as you're describing there, which are really, really low. And I'm sure they're no different to the load factors operating out of other airports at the moment. But we absolutely do need, as we get into 2022, to see those load factors going up, or absolutely there would be a risk of losing some of those hard-earned routes again.
Yeah, it's a low margin business. People think airlines make a fortune. Most airlines go bust. Most new airlines go bust. So there's a long list, like Stobart Trucking Group, which is a hugely successful trucking group, decided they could bring their knowledge of trucking into aviation, and they formed Stobart Air, and they bought London Southend Airport, and that hasn't ended well. Stobart Air has gone into liquidation. From Air Aran, that has been tried in Ireland. The Ryanairs are the exception, ones that start and are hugely successful. So the key is it's a low margin, high volume business. You have to fill the seats. So people would be surprised when I say that you have to get 80% of the seats full generally at a decent fare, and then you're into profit. So if you're seeing a plane generally that's half full or a third full, it's very loss making. So it's all bums and seats stuff, inbound and outbound.
Yeah, and I'll encourage people there maybe to pop a few questions into the chat box as well if you think of something. Moving on to transatlantic, Neil. I don't think any Cork Airport managing director can have an engagement with the Cork business community without talking about transatlantic out of Cork. I suppose we had our hard won Norwegian Air project, which ultimately didn't work out, but I think it showed that there was a market and there was demand there. Other circumstances, I suppose, overtook in that scenario. But do you want to give a perspective to the audience today in terms of potential for transatlantic out of Cork?
Potential for transatlantic out of Cork is good. If you step back and look at who could do it, I mean, like the potential candidates to do it would be American Airlines, United, Delta, JetBlue, an airline called Breeze, which is a new startup, and then in IAG family, Aer Lingus, and there's an airline called Level, which is a low-cost transatlantic. So you potentially have 5 or 6 who could do it. Now the issue is, would they do it? Do they see enough demand, and would it be profitable, and have they the right aircraft? So for example, a 787 Dreamliner, which is a really large aircraft, can land in Cork tomorrow. It has a suitable configuration, but it has 300 seats. And 300 seats to be filling up 4 times a week, 300 in, 300 out. I don't think our market could stand that. So myself and Brian met with Delta Airlines only a few weeks ago, and I don't know, was I disappointed or delighted? But the guy we met, and we've been working on the business case with Delta for transatlantic, said we were really, really, really close pre-pandemic on a 757 into Cork to New York. But that they've decided since they're retiring their 757 fleet, so we have to start again. So will we get transatlantic? Yes. Have we anyone signed up now at the moment? No. Probably a 3-year horizon, probably a US airline, but I'm confident we will get it. I'm confident it will work. So like you and I have discussed routes in the past from Frankfurt to Amsterdam, getting a different airline onto that will connect onwards. We've delivered them. Are we equally as confident about transatlantic? Yes, probably in a 3-year horizon.
I think that's a really positive message to have this morning, Neil, and thank you for that. We've a few minutes to go, and Neil, I think it's probably appropriate as well to talk about the whole area of sustainability and aviation. Business travel organizations are really going to be scrutinizing the level of business travel, and not COVID related or post-pandemic related, but this was coming down the line anyway, in terms of carbon footprint and so on. So how do you see, from an airport perspective and from an airline perspective, all of that playing out over the next number of years? There's very significant targets to be met. The airline sector is going to be no different. There's talk of carbon, of taxes on aviation fuel and so on. So can you give us your perspective, please?
So there's 2 aspects to sustainability in aviation. There's one, the airport itself, the airport as a building and as a service, and then there's the flying piece, and the flying piece is more significant. So from our own perspective, and we run the airport, we have the same challenges as every company out there. So we're decarbonizing by reducing our energy. Everything has gone LED. We're looking at our boilers. We're looking potentially at solar generation. And so we're reducing our energy footprint. We're looking at rainwater harvesting, seeing is that feasible in terms of our roof, so that we would use that. The more significant one is when you fly. And when you fly is very difficult in terms to decarbonize. The first thing is sustainable aviation fuels. So they're there at the moment. They can come from organic or inorganic sources. The challenge is they're 4 times more expensive than traditional kerosene and jet A1. And so sustainable aviation fuels are a start. The second piece is technology. So the engines are getting better and better, just like in your car. So they can travel further with less fuel and are greener engines. The third is new fuel types. So there are electric airplanes flying at the moment. There's a 12-seater and a 14-seater flying in the Nordics. So they can do short hops. So you could potentially go from Cork to Belfast on an electric airplane at the moment with 14 passengers. The problem is, as you scale up, the battery gets too heavy. So you can't put a battery in a 200-seater at the moment. So the industry is looking at hydrogen as a fuel type. Realistically, it could be 10 to 15 years away. So what you're going to see in the short term in flying, you're going to see a lot of sustainable aviation fuel. You're going to see much greener engines on the planes. You're going to see much greener planes, and then you're going to see new fuel types and potentially hybrid, which would be electric and jet A1 airlines, and also hydrogen powered aircraft as well. So that's the green journey for aviation. Just important to remember, Conor, aviation can be an easy target. It's 2% of worldwide emissions. Cement production is 8%. So cement production, as in the concrete blocks that nobody looks at twice, are 4 times more impacting upon the environment than the whole of aviation. And it's an emotive one, because people say, well, slap a carbon tax on aviation. They should be slapping a 4 times by carbon tax on your cement blocks, and there's no dialogue on that. So it's kind of high profile, but it needs to be put in context in terms of its impact on the world. But it's here for good. We take it very seriously, and the industry is getting greener. I just call out as well, one, potentially your clients, Green Rebel Marine, who operate here at Cork. And so we're enabling the greening of Ireland. They're operating a number of aircraft which are doing marine surveys for wind farms out of Cork Airport, and a wonderful success story for the Cork region.
Okay. And we're coming up to 9 o'clock. Neil, I have a question in here from Kathy O'Dwyer. She's wondering if you have any stats on the level of, I suppose, it's leakage from Cork to Dublin on the air coach, right? And whether you have anything to comment on that.
Yeah, so we do Red Sea survey at Cork Airport, and they survey at Dublin Airport, and they ask you, where have you come from today, where do you live, and where are you flying to? They ask you a number of other questions, like what's the purpose of your journey, is it business, is it leisure, what's the duration of your trip, and so on. And they give us statistics. And so what we see is, we see two types of leakage. We see leakage of routes that we don't have, that are very thin routes. So you might have people flying to Bucharest in Romania, people flying to Dubai or whatever, where there isn't enough demand to fill a plane 4 or 5 times a week in Cork. But you also have leakage on routes that we have, and sometimes that's fare driven, and sometimes it's flight convenience driven. So therefore, we might have Birmingham, say, 3 times a week, but they need to go over and back on the same day. Well, what we do is we use all that data to give to airlines and say, serve it from Cork. And if they see a business case and they can make money, they will serve it from Cork. So the leakage data is used, and it's used to get us new routes in Cork.
Okay, Neil, I think that's maybe a good point on which to close off. Again, thank you very much for your time this morning. I think there's maybe a dual message here, a message from the business community as to how important Cork Airport is in terms of our business connectivity, also individually from a leisure perspective, hugely important as well. And obviously it drives the tourism, inbound tourism economy here as well. So continuing to encourage you and all of your colleagues to keep up the good work, to continue to develop those routes. And I suppose you're delivering an equal message back to the business community that you need us to avail of those services to ensure that we can retain those into the future. But Neil, thank you very much for your time this morning. Certainly a very, very interesting discussion. I hope everyone on the call has found it useful, and have a good day, Neil. Thank you.
Pleasure, thank you, and happy Christmas to everyone.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So listen, thanks everyone for being with us this morning. We're not finished yet. We're moving on to a networking session now with my colleague Deirdre. So hopefully most of you can stay on for that for 10-15 minutes or so, and give you a chance to connect with some of your fellow chamber members. I'll hand over to Deirdre shortly, but just for me to thank everybody for being with us this morning. Thank Ronan Daly Jermyn as always, and of course the Irish Examiner. And thank my colleagues, of course, for making sure we have this up and running here this morning. And of course, to wish all of you, I'm sure I might see some of you on other events over the next couple of weeks or so, but for those that don't, wish you all a very happy and safe Christmas, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon. So with that, I'll hand over to Deirdre. Good morning.